Point. Let me play you Donald Trump in 2011 projecting the way he thinks presidents think and act. As you said, he thinks everyone thinks in the same corrupt ways he does. Here he is.
Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective. So the only way he figures that he's going to get reelected, and as sure as you're sitting there, is to start a war with Iran. Unfortunately, we have a president that doesn't know the first thing about negotiation. We have a real problem in the White House. So I believe that he will attack Iran sometime prior to the election because he thinks that's the only way he can get elected. Isn't it pathetic?
You could literally just take him out of it and read that script about Donald Trump, and everyone would pretty much agree with it. Let's move.
A man who's put American lives at risk for an awfully long time, and last night was the time that we needed to strike to make sure that this imminent attack that he was working actively was disrupted.
Iraq's weapons of mass destruction are controlled by a murderous tyrant who has already used chemical weapons to kill thousands of people. Facing clear evidence of peril, we cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Remember the early 2000s? Yeah, you remember. The American president and his administration insisted that after 9/11, we couldn't afford to wait for the threat of Iraq to become more imminent. We had to go to war because of weapons of mass destruction and even nukes, probably. Keep in mind, Iraq basically had no air force that could even reach us nearly 7,000 miles away, even if they did have nukes or WMDs, which of course they didn't. Remember that? Well, welcome to your deja vu. Donald Trump and his administration, without providing any real proof, wants you to believe that they just had to take out the top military leader in Iran, Soleimani, because he posed an imminent threat. And Trump knows that because the same intelligence community he has called liars and accused of plotting a coup against him proved it to him. Yeah, okay. Did they run that proof by Vladimir Putin first to make it believable to you, Mr. President? Meanwhile, unlike the Bush team, Team Trump isn't even bothering to do a misleading, lie-filled UN presentation. They just jumped right in with the drones. And over the past 24 hours, as this escalating mess unfolds, various prominent Iraq war supporters have stepped forward to bless us with their opinions of the raid. Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton, who, to be clear, has been jonesing for war with Iran since the Bush era, said, quote, "Hope this is the first step to regime change in Tehran." Perfect. Bolton is echoing a narrative that will sound familiar to those of you who are old enough to remember 2003, when we were told by our government that we were invading Iraq, a sovereign nation, to liberate them from their murderous dictator who is allegedly building a war chest of nuclear weapons and planning to wage a war on us at any minute. Oh, and don't forget the lying implication by the Bush administration that Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, which he didn't. That helped make the war much more marketable. Pro tip, the Bush White House alumni might want to sit this one out because we all remember all of that. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but once we were done, there were American torture chambers and hundreds of thousands of dead Iraqi soldiers and dead Iraqis, period, tens of thousands of injured or dead American troops, and it turns out all for nothing, for a lie. And now we're stuck with a giant, enormous Iraq embassy, the largest U.S. embassy in the world, that is to be defended by this guy, the Bone Spurs guy. Perfect.
With this deal, we have the possibility of peacefully resolving a major threat to regional and international security. Without a deal, we risk even more war in the Middle East. So let's not mince words. The choice we face is ultimately between diplomacy or some form of war. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not 3 months from now, but soon.
Well, that's an absurd argument, and it's the one they've made from the beginning, that it's either what the president negotiates with the Iranians or it's war. That's never been the alternative.
And I'll be here while John Chancellor accompanies President Nixon on his trip through the Middle East. That trip is underway tonight. The president is in Austria, and before it's over, he is scheduled to go through Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. Mr. Nixon was barely off the ground today before his lawyer announced the president's latest position on executive privilege. In letters released after he left for the Middle East today, President Nixon restated his determination not to give up more Watergate evidence to the House Judiciary Committee and federal judge Gerhard Gesell.
Much like Donald Trump, while the walls of impeachment were caving in on him, Richard Nixon tried to shift the focus to the Middle East. What he tried to do even became known as impeachment diplomacy, as people were rightly cynical about a president facing an early end to his term, trying to do something, anything, to change the subject.
Trump's acting head of Homeland Security said today, quote, "There are currently no specific credible threats against our homeland." And the New York Times reports, quote, "Senior Trump administration officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, repeatedly said on Friday that the new attacks under General Suleimani's leadership were imminent. But one Defense Department official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal planning, said that there was nothing new in the threat presented by the Iranian general." Importantly, this is also in the context of an administration and a president that has been documented ad nauseum every day to lie about everything, all the time, even the stupidest, most trivial things. It was not even a month ago the president was impeached for abusing the power of his office and trying to cover it up. There is absolutely no reason for anyone in the U.S. to credit anything the president or his administration says about matters of life and death and war and peace until it is demonstratively verified. Full stop.
Are you familiar with General Suleimani?
Yes. Go ahead. Give me a little. Go ahead. Tell me.
He runs the Quds forces.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Do you expect his behavior?
The Kurds, by the way, have been horribly mistreated by us.
No, not the Kurds. The Quds forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds forces, the bad guys.
Right.
Do you expect his behavior to change as a result?
Kurds.
No.
Quds. I'm sorry. I thought you said Kurds.
Okay.
Yeah, it is, Nicole, and I'm glad you used the word anxiety, because I think that's what we're also seeing from members of Congress. Look, the debate over whether it was justified because of imminent threat, whether it was constitutional, whether it was strategic, honestly, all that's going to fall within the margin of error, at least through a partisan lens, if you will. But the anxiety is that we have a president of the United States that the American people don't fully trust. And that's true of even his own supporters at times. They know he lies. They don't trust his word, and they don't trust his competence. Look, this is a president who has lied about his taxes, about Mexico paying for the wall, about his own health care. He's lied about tax policy, about health policy. He's lied about the denuclearization of North Korea, about his Ukraine phone call, about having Mueller fired. He's lied about his relationship with Vladimir Putin in matters of great consequence, including a catastrophic hurricane approaching the United States. In times of great consequence, he lies. His word can't be trusted, and neither can that of his deputies like Mike Pompeo. And then beyond his word, his competence simply can't be trusted. And that's to your point of his conversation with Hugh Hewitt. This is not a president who cares about the finer details of foreign policy, nor really understands it. And so the anxiety from Democrats on the Hill, I think, is that they don't believe this president. And frankly, neither do a number of Republicans.
The estimates for the Iraqi citizens that have died in the war in Iraq are astounding. I think it's upwards of 200,000 civilians who have died. I mean, us being seen as somehow a force for good there, I think we're well past that point, Eddie Glaude. And when this administration goes out and assassinates somebody who is in such a powerful position in Iran, somebody who nobody likes. I'm not defending the man in any way. I just wonder I wonder who the president is appealing to with a decision like that. After all, he's the one that ran on getting out of the Middle East, ran on the dumb decision that got us into the Iraq War. He ran against George Bush's legacy in military strongholds, like in South Carolina. He beat this drum a lot. So who is he actually talking to when he's deciding to do something as provocative as this?
I don't know. I mean, maybe his base. I mean, I'm not sure, but when we listen to the chants in Miami as he touts what he's just done, we hear it on USA.
I guess it doesn't matter what he does.
Right, it's this kind of uncritical patriotism. But I think we should be clear here. One, we should exhibit a healthy dose of skepticism about what's coming out of the White House. They have been lying to us for 3 years straight. And so
there are people out there who would argue that administrations have been lying to us for a lot longer than that, especially when it comes into the Middle East. We just saw the Afghanistan papers and how military officials and administration officials across the board have been telling us something when something else has been going on entirely.
I think we could stipulate to that claim, but we can still make a difference. There's lying and then there's lying. Right, so there's a way in which the lies of the Trump administration have stood out because it's so daily in some ways. And also, I just want us to take a step back. There's a kind of casualness that has attended our conversation around the assassination of General Suleimani. And this has nothing to do with trying to redeem his character. It has something to do with who we take ourselves to be. And as an American citizen, as a person who wants to step back and think about what does it mean for the U.S. to engage in the assassination of a state actor, I want us to be very, very careful in how we talk about this. So, one, we need to be skeptical about their rationale for doing it. Two, we need to understand what it means for the American government to engage in such action.
Okay, I got to push back because Soleimani is in Baghdad. He's not in Tehran. He's not in Iran. He is in Baghdad. He is directing attacks on
So show
Americans.
me the proof of what he was going to do that was imminent.
Well, we know what he did. We know what he did.
They said imminently he was going to...
No, I'm not talking about that. Here's what happened over the last month. We had an Iranian, a Shiite-backed militia supported by Iran attack an American position, 3 Americans wounded, an American contractor killed. We had this totally bogus attack on the U.S. Embassy following actual demonstrations in Iraq against Iran. There were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Iran protesting Iraq protesting Iranian interference inside Iran. And you have the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Soleimani, who is a terrorist, that is a confirmed terrorist organization. The State Department under Obama and Trump calls it a terrorist organization in Baghdad. He was not on his own soil. I mean, so the idea that somehow there was no provocation, the Iranians have been testing us for 6 months. They shot down a drone. Trump almost pulled off a military strike against them and pulled back at the last minute. They shot holes in tankers.
I'm not arguing any of that. I'm wondering if going after the second in command in Iraq, if there was a plan to go after the second in command in Iraq, in Iran, which would be akin, people are saying, to going after our defense secretary, something like that.
Well, if you want to call our defense secretary a terrorist who is responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands,
there are people in the Middle East who would say that.
They might, and they can say whatever it is they want to say. Then there are the facts, which are that 500,000 people have died in Syria as a result of Iranian meddling and support for Bashar al-Assad in his civil war against his own people.
Hundreds of thousands of civilians have died during the wars that we've been waging in the Middle East.
Okay, so if what you want to say is that we don't have the moral standing to strike somebody who is
no, I'm not saying that. But I am questioning the evidence. I'm questioning the evidence. I'm being skeptical of the evidence because they haven't shown it to me. And I'm being skeptical because of the hangover that this country is under from 2003. Beth, jump in.
So, taking out a general as a signal might be a good thing to do. But in this case, it was clearly an impulsive, ill thought out, no strategy behind it. probably no good's going to come of it in the longer run. So what we've seen since this administration is no longer a National Security Council where, you know, the elements of American power sit down to consider options and analyze them and make a decision and communicate and get our allies aboard. And holy crow, this thing is really amateur hour, and no good will come of it.
Is it your view that this was lawful or unlawful?
Unlawful. It's clearly unlawful. I mean, you've got one of the most powerful generals of Iran, a sovereign state, and we're basically going and taking him out with no consultation from Congress, no approval from Congress. The administration hasn't even given us a clear reason for what the authorization of force would be. I heard someone was saying that it's the 2002 AUMF, what we used to get Saddam Hussein. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, it's about as smart as the war in Iraq was. I guess that's the only parallel. But how you can say that Congress's approval to get Saddam Hussein is now approval to go get a top general in Iran makes no logical sense.
The table here, Ben. Donald Trump is now claiming that he had intelligence of an imminent threat from Iraq. This is the same guy who didn't trust his intelligence services when they said Russia attacked our election. Set that to the side. It's not clear to me that he even knows anything that he's talking about. Here is Donald Trump back in 2015 describing who Suleimani was and the differences between them and another group of people who are unrelated. Take a listen.
Are you familiar with General Suleimani?
Yes. Go ahead. Give me a little. Go ahead. Tell me.
He runs the Quds forces.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Do you expect his behavior?
The Kurds, by the way, have been horribly mistreated by us.
No, not the Kurds. The Quds forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds forces, the bad guys.
Right.
Do you expect his behavior to change as a result?
Kurds.
No.
Quds. I'm sorry. I thought you said Kurds.
Okay. So this is the guy who didn't, a couple of years ago, didn't know the difference between the Quds force and the Kurds. Does it sound credible to you that there was some threat assessment by the same intelligence community he doesn't trust that led to a logical reason to have this action of assassinating this foreign leader?
Like Richard said, the fact that Qasem Soleimani might be directing even Shia militias that want the U.S. out of Iraq, that I don't doubt. The specificity of the intelligence, I think, is an enormous question. Frankly, if they had that type of specific intelligence of an imminent threat, I would think that they would have presented it to Congress by now. What is the reason for this delay? And I think there are a couple other things that are relevant here, Joy. First of all, they claim that they took the strike to prevent an attack on our personnel. But every analyst knows that taking this strike just raised the threat of attacks on our personnel. So the logic of their entire case falls apart. Secondly, his own intelligence community had told him that the Iran nuclear deal was working. And he lied and said that Iran wasn't complying and used that to justify pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, which started this whole escalatory cycle that we've been on for the last 2 years, Joy. So there's a fundamental incoherence in what Donald Trump's strategy is here, what he thinks he's trying to achieve, and frankly, whether we can trust whatever he says about the information he puts forward. Frankly, the rest of the world doesn't put any trust in anything Donald Trump says. So the United States is also completely isolated as we find ourselves now on the brink of a much, much more serious conflict with Iran.
Yeah, I mean, even with Iraq, which, those of us who opposed the war thought that even having Britain go along with it didn't make it justifiable. It was pretty clear that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, but they told us it did. That was a lie. And now you have Donald Trump. We're supposed to believe this guy, that suddenly he believes the intelligence forces and that he had an authorization. Does an AUMF, an authorization to use military force passed by Congress about 9/11 and Iraq, can that be just transferred over to an individual that's from Iran?
No, absolutely not. And look, we engage in this act of war. We assassinate a senior official of another government.
Oh, Joy, really quick. Go ahead. Unfortunately, I'm the only person on this panel who has ever been in combat with Iran and their proxies. 1983, Iran and Lebanon. In 1988, direct naval combat with the Iranian Navy. In 2004, proxy Shia militias in Iraq. These people have capability. We are fooling ourselves if we think that we can just do things and not understand the consequences of what a unified country of 85 million people who now have thousands of anti-ship missiles, hundreds of ballistic missiles, who can muster up a commando force between 300,000 and 1 million men in a matter of weeks and could savage every oil field and attack every facility we have in Iraq and the Eastern Arabian Sea or the Persian Gulf. If we ignore this and you start listening to the Lindsey Grahams and the John Boltons, you're going to get more than war. Because we're capable of handling a war, but we are not capable of losing ships. We are not capable of having that embassy turned into a fishbowl for thousands of rockets, which could pour down on it by the hundreds per hour. This is dangerous. And until we understand what we just did has the ability to kill way more American citizens than they claim to have protected, we are standing into danger.
And
as president, my highest and most solemn duty is the defense of our nation and its citizens. We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
Works every time for administrations seeking war, right? I'm sure that Trump hopes that you, that we, particularly in the media, will react to what he's done the way the country reacted when George W. Bush launched a war against Iraq, claiming that that was done to make America safer after 9/11, which Iraq had nothing to do with. I'm sure Trump is hoping that we will all line up behind him, throw on a flag pin, and send his approval rating soaring. Mr. President, don't hold your breath.